Hey everyone, thank you so much for coming out. This is actually my first talk in 5 years since I sold my last company. What I do now is I do research and development for LeafSource. You're going to find out a lot of really incredible things today. I'm really excited to share this with you. BioAge is actually a book that I wrote going back, and I hate dating myself like this, but about 20 years ago. I was doing work with a NASA neuroscientist by the name of Dr. Michael Schmidt. And we became very good friends, and we were so interested in aging at that time. And you know, we were young, but we were also observing what was going on in society with people going through what we call premature aging. And you know, people really don't understand the concept of premature aging, but believe it or not, the great majority of the population are experiencing just that. So we expire from this planet at the tender age of 76.7 years of age on average, if you bring in both females and males. So we have to understand that that is a blip in our human potential. If you go back about 25 years ago, there was a study from Duke University, and that study actually showed that we have the genetic capability to live to be 125 years. Nobody's living to be 125. A few years ago, actually going back more than a few years ago, there was a lady by the name of Jean Calment. How many of you remember her? She was in the news, 122. She died at the tender age of 122. She smoked, she did everything you're not supposed to do, she drank every single night. But in her genome, in her blueprint, she had the ability to fight off all of the crap that goes on every single day. So Dr. Michael Schmidt and I decided to write a book called BioAge. And in that book, we invited 10 of the world's leading researchers in their related field of expertise. And we didn't pay them to write in the book. It was coming from a place of passion, because we wanted it to be real. We wanted the message to be real. How many of you remember Dr. Batman Galej? Right? Your Body's Many Cries for Water, one of the best books on water biochemistry. He passed away a few years ago. He was one of the authors in this book. And every one of these researchers came in and wrote on what they were so impassioned about and how aging takes place within the body and how we don't have to allow it just to get the better of us. So that's really what this talk is about today. And I've done many different things than I used to do 5, 6 years ago when I had my last company. I'm 100% natural with products that I create now. I used to be like a lot of other researchers at the time and put together, you know, all of these great products with the best research at that time. And it didn't matter whether they were synthetic, it didn't matter whether they were isolated. All that mattered is if the research showed that this vitamin or this nutrient did a certain thing that was positive in the human body, then we could put that in a formula. And if there was a synergistic effect with another nutrient, well, we could put that in the formula as well, and we can test it. And people got really good results from these formulas. But what I learned over the years is that nature does things very, very different from the majority of science out there. And we don't understand how this science really works in nature. All we know is nature never, ever works in isolation. We do know that nature always works in synergy. There's a matrix, and it's always more powerful than any individual component, right? What do we do nowadays? We go into a health food store and we say, oh, I want resveratrol because I heard on some podcast that resveratrol is really good for aging. Or, hey, I want to take beta carotene because beta carotene is supposed to be really good for protecting the genetic structure as we go through the aging process. And then we hear about all these negative studies coming out with things like beta carotene causing cancer, lung cancer, and causing, you know, premature death. And we go, what? That doesn't make any sense. This is a natural compound. Well, almost all of the beta carotene that's sold in products these days is synthetic. It's man-made. And it does not behave as the beta carotene that's found in a carrot. It's very, very different. So what I want to do is I want to take you through a little history of what happened, okay? If you go back to the beginning of the last century, throughout most of our existence, our ancestors experienced what we call fast deaths. They didn't suffer for years like they do in this day and age. So at that time, they would die from infections and traumatic injuries. You know, maybe they got attacked, maybe they were in a battle. Diarrhea. Diarrhea was one of the top 3 causes of death going back to the beginning of the last century. And childbirth. Childbirth was the biggest killer of all. I mean, doctors at that time who were delivering babies didn't even know you should wash your hands. So we had to discover all of this, right? So nowadays, we have found a way to end the fast death syndrome. People aren't just dropping dead. And some of you may argue that point with me and say, what are you talking about? I know this person and that person, and they just dropped dead. And that's different. What I'm talking about on the mass, for the majority of the population, we do not experience death, usually, from diarrhea and tuberculosis and pneumonia and all of those things that we died from going back to the beginning of the last century. So when we created antibiotics and when we learned how to wash our hands with hygiene and when we learned better procedures to take care of people who were sick with critical care, we were able to stop this syndrome of quick death and people were able to live a little longer, chronologically speaking. So what happened here is nowadays we die from what? Obesity, right? We die from heart disease. We die from blood sugar dysregulation. That's a huge one. And by the way, all of these are connected. Every one of them are connected. We die from cancer. We die from dementia. We die from frailty. And the list just goes on and on. So what we've done is we've traded fast death syndrome for slow death syndrome. And the majority of people are suffering 10, 20 years up until the time they're ready to expire, to retire from this planet Earth. So it's not really the right way to live, is it? It's more of an existence thing. And that's what's happening to so many people. So here's a question for you today. How do you feel? It's a rhetorical question. Don't even worry about it. So I asked this question because the majority of the population is confused. They really don't know how they're feeling. And they don't know how they're feeling because they've been living a certain way for so long that it becomes their normal way of existence. That's mediocrity, by the way. So one of the things that happens is we sail at half-mast. And we sail at half-mast for so long, we don't remember what health feels like. We don't remember what energy feels like. We lose all of it. We don't remember what it was like to be able to jump up and down and do all those crazy things that we did when we were children. And most people live a life of acceptance. They accept this less than optimal way that they feel from day to day as the way it is, as if there's nothing they can do. So the question is mediocrity for you? Is mediocrity for the majority of people that come into stores these days? Is mediocrity for the majority of the population that doesn't know what's going wrong with them? That puts everything down to, oh, you know what, it's part of aging. I'm not supposed to be energetic when I'm in my 40s or 50s. That's crazy, right? Or, you know, it's normal to have aches and pains. It's normal to fall down. It's normal to get fatter as you get older. All of those things that we just chalk up to life experiences. That's mediocrity. That is us accepting this new way of life as it is. How many of you remember what the world was like 3 years ago? Could you imagine, I said this to an Uber driver bringing me here today, I said, could you imagine if you were watching a sci-fi movie going back 5 years ago, and in that sci-fi movie, people were wearing masks and not breathing oxygen in their cars and taking walks outside with masks on, and People were afraid to come next to each other. Nobody hugged anymore. And the world was completely different. You'd come out of that cinema going, wow, what a crazy movie. Wow, could you imagine if that was real? And it's real. And we accept it. And this is that's a good thing, but the point is the majority of the population, they get in line. They get in line. And it's not normal, and we need to move past acceptance, okay? We need to stop becoming proactive. I mean, we need to start becoming proactive, and we need to stop being reactive. Because what do? We wait until we go and see a doctor, and that doctor says to us, I have some bad news for you. You're pre-diabetic. By the way, that's the best news you can get, because that means you can reverse it. But if they say, oh, you have cancer, oh, you have heart disease, oh, you have diabetes, oh, whatever it is, it's almost too late at that point. You've let your body erode to such a point that it's very difficult to bring it back. That doesn't mean you can't bring it back, because aging is a dance. Aging is a dance between repair and breakdown. Repair is called anabolic metabolism, anabolism. Breakdown is called catabolic metabolism, catabolism. From the time we're born, we break down, but we rebuild faster than the body can actually keep up with that breakdown state of affairs. And when people prematurely age, the most simplistic way to explain that is you are breaking down just a little faster than you're able to repair the body. That is called premature aging. So how many of you, this is not a rhetorical question, how many of you remember what it was like to be a child? How many of you remember what it was like to be able to pop out of bed in the morning without an alarm clock? Right? What did you do? Did you run to the kitchen to reach for the Java? Right? Because you couldn't get up in the morning without it? Your head wasn't clear. You were like, don't talk to me. I need my coffee fix. Of course not. You'd explode if you were a kid and had coffee. The point is we forget what it's like to create that energy, and we panic. And when we panic, what we do is we reach for a stimulant to get past that crux, that place of non-movement, of feeling gross, horrible feeling when you don't have energy production. Nowadays, what happens is we get up. We don't pop out of bed. We may hear a pop in the morning when we get out of bed. That's a little different. But things are not quite the same, are they? We can't. How many of you still do cartwheels? Right? How many of you did a cartwheel when you were a kid? Why? Because you could. Right? How many of you went to a park and there were monkey bars? Whoa, those things were so cool. You know why? Because you could use them. And you could swing like a monkey on them. Try doing that now. Not so good, because you'll be probably in the emergency ward, because you've let your body decline, and this becomes a very big problem. So this is us when we're young, right? So we're physical human beings. I know some of you in the room are going, what are you talking about? I'm spiritual. Okay, you're spiritual too, but right now we're just talking about the physicality of being human, okay? Great skin when you're young. Your eyesight actually works, right? You don't need those bifocals. You're able to run for the bus if you need to run for the bus. You're able to get up. You feel good for the most part. And then what happens is you start to break down. You go through the aging process, right? So aging has now been determined as a disease. Now we are experiencing this disease like we never have before. And there are ways to reverse it, and that's really why you're all here today. I'm going to talk to you about some of the most simplistic ways that you can reverse biological aging. And it is so simple that many of us forget about this. Intrinsically, we know it's got to be simple. Something's wrong because it didn't used to be this way. But now we allow it to happen again, right? Because we're accepting it as our new reality. We have these candles on our cake. We get up, we actually are born, right? We move away from the womb, and we put candles on our cake to celebrate every single year we are 1 year older. But it doesn't matter how many candles you have on your cake. What matters is how are you aging on the most fundamental level of all. That's the cellular level. That's the biological level. That's why I call it bio-age. And it doesn't matter how many years you've been on planet Earth. You don't have to be a statistic and expire at 76.7 years of age. You can live possibly to be 125, maybe even longer when new technology starts to kick in. So here is the thing. We blame it on our genes, right? We go right back to that blame game, right? Because we say, well, you know what? It just sounds difficult. Like, I don't want to have to get up in the morning and do deep breathing, right? That takes like 5 minutes. That's a lot of time. And I don't want to have to go into a cold plunge or even put on a cold shower. That feels horrible on my body. And I don't want to be positive all the time. That takes a lot of energy to be positive all the time. And I don't want to find new friends because they're negative all the time. I like my negative friends, right? It allows me to believe that my life isn't really that bad after all. That's why people watch soap operas, by the way. So here is what happens. We have these beautiful things called genes, our DNA, our blueprints, right? It's really our manual. And that manual throughout life dictates how we build the body, how we build every single one of our trillions of cells. So what we do is we say, hey, all of that stuff sounds really good, Brad, and you know, some of those supplements that you're talking about sound even good, and I believe that, you know, you have to do some of those environmental and lifestyle things, but at the end of the day, I have a lot of obesity in my family. And you know what? The stats do show that if you have one obese parent in your family, you have a greater than 60% chance of becoming an obese adult yourself. But if you have 2 obese parents in your family, that goes way up. It's closer to 80% is not in your favor. So if you have 2 obese parents in your family, you're probably, if you do nothing, you're probably going to be obese yourself. So when we look at our genes, we can use that argument for everything. I became a researcher because I lost both of my parents in the same year when I was in my early 20s. And I lost both of them not to a crazy accident. I lost them to cancer. And they died 6 months to the day from one another. My mother passed away first from pancreatic cancer, and then my father, 6 months to the day, died from prostate cancer. And he also had heart disease, and yes, they smoked and did all the wrong things, but the point is, I have a lot of cancer in my genes. Diabetes, we can use that argument for diabetes. We can use that argument for absolutely everything. But I'm going to tell you one thing, and then we're going to move on. Okay, we're gonna get to the fun stuff. Your genes are nothing more than templates upon which you all build your unique life experiences on. And you know what? You build your unique life experiences upon those templates because of 3 factors. One is your environmental factors. No, not where you choose to live, like, hey, I'm gonna go to Florida, it's warm all the time. No, I'm talking about what do you allow in your internal environment? You know, like those people you hang around with that are negative all the time, you know, you're worried all the time, anxiety, stress, that's your environment. You build your unique life experiences upon those templates because of your dietary factors. What do you choose to put in your body? Hey, it's fun eating junk food. I'll be the first one to admit it. I have the biggest sweet tooth. But once you go down that road, there's no turning back. I've followed ketogenic diets for a very long time. They work so well for me. But the minute I get to the cheat day, it's hard to go back to a ketogenic diet. It's even hard to go back to a low carbohydrate diet. And you build your unique life experiences upon those templates because of your lifestyle factors. Did you get up this morning to work out? Do you know how tired I was? I flew in from Vancouver. I got up at 7 o'clock today. I didn't sleep all night because I was thinking of some stuff. A very good friend of mine just passed away. That was on my mind the entire night. I would lay down for 8 hours, but my eyes were open the entire time. I just could not get to sleep. But I got up at 7 to go to the gym, and I was the only one in the gym, as I usually am in the hotels that I train at. So what I'm trying to tell you is your genes are responsible for loading the gun when it comes to disease, but they're also responsible for loading the gun when it comes to health. And it is your lifestyle factors, it's your dietary factors, and it's your environmental factors that are responsible 9 times out of 10 for pulling that trigger. So one of the first things we have to understand is when we're young, we have a lot of lean metabolically active tissue. This is where the majority of the energy takes place within the human body. It's a beautiful thing. We have muscle. No, we're not mini Arnold Schwarzeneggers. The point is we have lean body mass and a lot of energy takes place within that muscle tissue. Why? Because the muscle tissue has a great deal, thousands upon thousands of these tiny little engines called mitochondria. Then we go through the aging process, and by the way, this is called sarcopenia. Not many people have heard about it. You've heard of osteopenia. Oh my goodness. You can't lose any bone, but you lose muscle way before you lose bone. And when you lose muscle, you lose your strength, and then you fall down and you have frailty and all of those crazy things happen. So this is what happens to us. We lose the muscle, we gain the fat in the place of where the muscle used to be. By the way, if you want to hasten this process, go on a diet. Do you know what diets accomplish? And I wrote about this in 5 of my books. Smaller fat people. That's all they do. And how many times have you heard a friend say, oh, I weigh the same as I did when I was in college, but I don't look the same when I take my clothes off, right? Because all of that has been displaced with fat. You don't have as much of those tiny little engines to create energy, and you're going to become much more frail. So exercise is not an option, it is a priority. How many of you have heard of vital capacity? That's your body's ability to take in, utilize, transport oxygen. You need to exercise it to increase that overall activity in the body, and that's what we're going to talk about as well. Here are the 3 hallmarks of aging I'm going to be discussing today. One is genomic instability. All that means is every time your genes, every time your DNA replicates to create another cell, it has to be stable. And it doesn't remain stable. There's a lot of things that go wrong. Hypoxia, that's the inability to utilize oxygen efficiently. A lot of us aren't even breathing properly, and that's a whole other story. And then low ATP, this is the energy currency that you can't tie your shoelaces without producing. And by the way, if you could measure the amount of ATP, adenosine triphosphate, that you produce in a 24-hour period, believe it or not, it would weigh in at 150 pounds per person per 24-hour period. That's been mathematically equated. And yet we don't think about it. We don't think about ATP when you wake up in the morning. Oh, I had a good dream. Yeah, it was ATP that fueled that dream. So let's start here with genomic instability. Every time your genes divide. So here you have this beautiful instruction manual that is unique to you. And every time your cells divide, that instruction manual opens up and it reads. It goes, oh, okay, I know exactly what to do here. Here's the blueprint. Now what happens is at the end of the chromosomes in the nucleus of your cells, you have to protect those genes. So you have these little shoelaces, or the little caps at the end, the gold part. And this is called the telomere, and those are the caps that protect that telomere every time the gene opens up and creates division. But what happens is as we go through the aging process, that cap gets a little shorter and a little shorter. And what happens is the DNA starts to stick together, and it starts to create a lot of instability. And it's almost like taking different words in that manual and basically erasing them. And now every time that manual opens up, the body can't really read it. It doesn't really understand what it's trying to say. It says, I think it's this, but there's mistakes that get made. And those mistakes create a lot of havoc in the body. And by the way, there was some research by Dr. Lisa Epple, going back from University of California, probably about 20 years ago now, where she was the first researcher to that psychological stress causes these telomeres to basically divide too quickly. And she actually proved when women are caregivers, this was in her study, caregivers to chronically ill children, they showed the premature aging of an extra decade over women who were just caregivers to children. And children can be pretty stressful, right? So you can imagine if you had a very sick child, you're hastening the aging process. Hypoxia. How many of you did breathing exercises this morning? I'm talking about deep belly breathing exercises. 1 person, 2, 3, 4. Good. Good for you. You should. It should be the first thing you do in the morning. Sit on the edge of your bed and do obnoxious breathing 30 times. Just ridiculous breathing. And then hold your breath on the last one. And try doing that 3 times. If you can't, just do it one succession of 30 breaths. And it'll be amazing what you feel. Okay? So hypoxia, the absence of oxygen, is the presence of disease and aging. How many of us in the health industry have heard of something called alkalinity? Right? Oh, how do you get alkaline? Drink a green drink. Not. Does nothing for alkalinity. Breathing is how you affect alkalinity. Do you know what alkalinity means? More oxygen. The more oxygen you have and the more energy, the more alkaline, the less fat you have. People who are obese and can't lose fat no matter what they do, they are in a constant acidic environment and they can't create energy. It's such an inefficient way of creating energy. So I'm going to show you what that looks like. This is your engine. This is where you have thousands and thousands and thousands of these in every single cell of the body, actually in every single cell of the body. And what happens here is this is where energy, all that stuff that you take for granted in a 24-hour period, this is where it all occurs, okay? You're producing at the end of the day this high energy compound called ATP. And what happens is when you're young and biologically healthy, you're active, hopefully, you go through deep breathing, maybe you're calm the majority of the time, you don't let stress affect you, and you eat well, then your mitochondria, those engines, are really healthy. But that's not the majority of the population. The majority of the population is this. They're lazy, they do shallow breathing, or they hold their breath the majority of the day, and they certainly stress out a lot, right? So they go through what we call mitochondrial dysfunction. Very inefficient way of creating energy. And I've written about this extensively in obesity, where a lot of people who cannot abstain from carbohydrates are usually doing so because they're in a constant acidic environment, which is causing them to crave those carbohydrates to create more energy in that inefficient way. So let's look at that. So here we have this beautiful thing called mitochondria. It's all about the energy production. And what happens with most of us is we are producing energy in the cytoplasm of the cell, not inside the engines, outside of the engines. And we're producing energy there where we can only produce 2 molecules of this energy substrate called ATP. That's when we're acidic. We're not alkaline, because you need a lot of oxygen to create up to 18 times more of that energy. And that is oxidative phosphorylation. Why do you think we call it cellular respiration? Breathing. That's how important oxygen is to your cells. Now, it's one thing to be able to breathe, but there are nutrients that you can take to allow better cellular respiration. We're going to look at that next. So first of all, how many of you have heard of triage? When you're faced with limited resources, if there was ever a catastrophe, for instance, and there wasn't enough medical professionals, they would have to decide which patients they would treat first based on the severity, obviously, of their condition, right? So if you had someone that was bleeding, they cut themselves, you want to help them, but if somebody was having a heart attack, you've got to obviously help them first. So what does this have to do with anything we're talking about today? Well, one of those theories of aging is actually called the triage theory of aging. And the triage theory of aging goes like this, and this was actually from the University of California again. And what's interesting about it is if you're just modestly deficient in even one of the essential nutrients that the body needs, it has to ration them in terms of priority. What's more important? Is it important for your body to make you live to be 125 and healthy and be able to play basketball and tennis and everything? No. It's important for you to pass your genes on, biologically speaking. So in order for that to happen, you've just got to keep the host alive long enough to be able to replicate, right? I know that sounds so simplistic and, not all that spiritual, but from a biological perspective, that's really how the body operates. Now, what does this look like? Well, according to the researchers, we need 40 nutrients I'm telling you something right now, we need a lot more than 40, but let's just use what they say. So the 40 nutrients look something like this. You need 15 vitamins, you need 15 minerals, you actually need over 77 minerals, by the way, but let's forget about that. 15 minerals, 15 vitamins, 2 essential fatty acids, that's all you need for the fats, and then you need 8, maybe 9 amino acids that the body can use to rebuild and create that anabolic, beautiful metabolism, right? So research has showed unequivocally that we are deficient in at least one of those 40 nutrients. And don't forget, we need many, many more than that. So if we're deficient in one of those 40, we're deficient in many, many more. And if we're deficient in those, that means the body cannot carry out its functions effectively. And that means you're out of luck if you want to experience something called healthy longevity. Okay? So I bring this up because this is the first thing. What happens when people come into stores and everything and they talk to you and you say, hey, first thing, have you ever used a multivitamin before? And they go, oh, I don't need a multivitamin, I eat really well. Oh, you eat really well? Okay, well, I guess you don't need a multivitamin. But what you have to understand is everybody needs a multivitamin because we are deficient in one or more of those nutrients. But is it okay to just take whatever multivitamins are on the shelf? Like, would any of you take a multivitamin from the majority of pharmaceutical companies, right? Or pharmacies that are sold in pharmacies? You know the number one multivitamin I'm talking about, right? And the children's number one multivitamin, 100% synthetic. That's not all. I mean, colors and dyes and fillers and you name it, things that should never be in the human body. So remember I said I've changed the way I look at things from a natural perspective from what I used to do? Because I used to take synthetic nutrients and put them together and create things like multivitamins for myself and other companies. I don't do that anymore. Because one of the things we have to understand is every single nutrient that you take into your body is not used in the form that you take it in. It's all converted. And the only way it's converted is if you take the right form. And if you have the right machinery to make that happen. A lot of us have genetic deficits in our body where we can't convert, we can't methylate some of these nutrients effectively. What is the number one fortified vitamin right now in the world and has been for many, many years? We give this to women. Folic acid. How much folic acid is in the majority of food? None. There is no folic acid. It's man-made. There's folate, and then folate has to convert in the body as well into methyl folate. Eventually, it goes through about 4 steps, but the point is we are taking synthetic isolated nutrients that the body does not know how to utilize. So we have to start asking ourselves, what is in our multivitamin? Is it okay to take something that starts out as petroleum or coal tar? Or genetically modified corn. Is that okay? I don't think so. Now, some of the research says, oh, but it's genetic. I mean, if you look at it, it's molecularly identical. You can't tell the difference under a microscope. And that is true to a certain degree, but there are things that are occurring at a microscopic level that we can't see. Like micronutrient cofactors that accompany the nutrients from food into our body, and we do not take supra-physiological dosages of any nutrients from any food, but we do from supplements. And we only do that because we have to force those nutrients into the body, and that can create a host of problems. So we created this incredible product called Real Multi. Real Multi is only from food. And all we do is we take 10 superfoods, all organic, and through a water extraction process, we create 21 organic vitamins and minerals in their natural state with their micronutrient cofactors as they would be found in food. It's 100% whole food, derived from 10 foods and 21 vitamins, and here's the beautiful thing, it's a 1 a day. There's no supraphysiological dosages. This is your recommended daily allowance of all 21 of those nutrients per 1 capsule. Why? Because you don't need more than that unless you are severely deficient in one or more of those nutrients. And here's another thing we have to understand. The further we move away from the soil, the unhealthier food becomes, right? That's commercial food. We're in a fast-paced society. We don't have time to cook nowadays. Who wants to cook nowadays? Well, what we have to understand is the soil delivers nutrients like you could never imagine. You know, you go back millions of years ago and there were these lush rainforests at the time, and those eventually break down like everything else breaks down, and they eventually, with the right circumstances, create this miraculous compound called humic and fulvic acid. And humic and fulvic acid naturally contains 77 organically bound trace minerals. What? Minerals aren't organic, but they are if they're bound to food molecules, and that's exactly what this is. 17 amino acids, 9 vitamins, plant enzymes, polyphenols, prebiotics, antioxidant enzymes like superoxide dismutase, glutathione peroxidase, methionine reductase. Those are thousands of times more powerful than any vitamin C or vitamin A. And soil-based organisms, which are the probiotics to the plant kingdom. This is what's found in nature. This is not man-made. This is found only in a few pockets around the globe as humic and fulvic acid, and never, if you want to take, never take it isolated. Don't take humic acid, take humic fulvic acid complexes. Why? Because nature always works in synergy, never in isolation. You usually find a 70% fulvic acid to 30% humic acid ratio, and that's why we deliver it in a 100% water extraction model. No chemicals whatsoever. I hear people all the time saying, oh, what about Himalayan shilajit? Isn't Himalayan shilajit really good? Yeah, on paper it's amazing, it really is. Did you know 40% of Himalayan shilajit is fulvic acid? The problem with a lot of Himalayan shilajit is very, very hard to extract the good stuff out of it because it comes as a tar. And by extracting it, they sometimes have to use very harsh chemicals that are very hard to get rid of. So with humic and fulvic acid, you're going right to the source. This is 100% water extracted. We were the first ones in the industry 20 years ago. Humic and fulvic acid from LeafSource was actually delivered to the health food stores. It is a product that has never tested positive for heavy metals. And every single batch is tested for heavy metals. And by the way, one of the beautiful things about humic and fulvic acid is they, by nature, chelate heavy metals. Place them in a point of suspension in the body until the body can get rid of them. And that's just one of the things. The most incredible thing, according to the research and why I'm so excited about them, is they protect your mitochondria. They allow your mitochondria to be more stable. They allow for more ATP to be produced. They increase the lifespan of natural electron transport mechanisms like coenzyme Q10, and the list just goes on and on. First thing people say, I just feel better, I have more energy. It's because of the natural ATP production. And this is the last thing I want to share with you today. How many of you have found yourself in this kind of scenario at a party? So obviously, when we look at stress, stress comes in many forms. Perception equals reality in the face of danger. Danger is just a fancy word for stress. I can't say it any better than Mark Twain. Mark Twain had this saying, he said, I have been through some terrible things in my life, some of which actually happened. How many of you worry about things which will never occur? Because most of those nasty things, how many parents are in the audience? Put your hands up. So you worry about ridiculous things, don't you? Oh, my kid didn't call me. What happened? Somebody took my kid. Right? You don't even know. They're like 5 minutes late. So the point is, we create this anxious environment in our head. And by the way, we're creating stress hormones, right? It's fight or flight. It doesn't matter whether there's a saber-toothed tiger chasing you. It doesn't matter whether there's someone in an alley running after you with a dagger. It's the same thing. You're worrying about things. You're producing the same hormonal response. And by the way, if you do that too much, that's passed on through generations. They've proven pregnant women who worry the majority of the time or suffer from depression or anxiety all the time, their children have shorter telomeres and they don't live as long, biologically speaking. So we need to get our perception of reality in check. I know that doesn't always work so well. And then what do? We wake up in the morning, we have no energy again, so we reach for the coffee, right? What do you think the coffee is doing? It's exacerbating the stress response. Glucocorticoids, right? I hear people say all the time, oh, I need my coffee because I don't feel energetic. You're not creating energy from coffee. You're borrowing energy off your adrenal system. Go to the bank, take a loan out, and when the bank manager calls you to pay back that loan, say, no, it's okay, thank you. Right? You're going to eventually go bankrupt if you don't have the money to pay it back. What do you think people do? They go hormonally bankrupt. So we need to cool it on the caffeine, and we need to look at adaptogens that actually work. So here's our new product called our Stress Complex. You know, I used to throw the kitchen sink at products. Like, seriously, I'd have 8, 9, 10, 11 ingredients. There are 3 ingredients in this formula, and it's the best stress formula I've ever created with 3 ingredients. And those ingredients are ashwagandha, not just any ashwagandha, sensorol ashwagandha. Sensorol ashwagandha it really follows the laws of nature because it has the synergistic effect of leaf and root, and it delivers the active ingredients at double the amount of most other ashwagandhas on the market. They're usually about 5% with analoids. This is 10% guaranteed with analoids. That's just one of the ingredients. The next ingredient is Panax ginseng, not with 4% ginsenosides, 7% ginsenosides, and then organic cordyceps. And this is a formula that can help people not just reduce stress, not just help to restore overall energy, not just reduce stress hormones like cortisol. By the way, we have all these claims through Health Canada because we've been able to show what these 3 do together in synergy. Support overall cognitive function and experience better sleep. This is one of the only formulas on the market that works on both body and mind. And it works very, very well. So last thing I want to share with you, because I'm pretty much out of time right now, there was an old Eagles tune. Well, I'll just share with you the lyrics and it'll come back to you. So oftentimes it happens that we live our lives in chains. How many of you remember what the song is? Okay. The reason I'm sharing this with you really, really quickly, not a few years ago, I'm going back now probably 15 years. There was a gentleman that used to come to my lectures all the time. I would see him every time I was in Vancouver doing a lecture. I'd see him year after year after year. He'd come and I recognized his face, and he was always a really big man, like very obese, like probably 100, maybe even 150 pounds more fat than he should have had on his frame. And he'd come and every new book, I'd come out with a new book every year, and he'd buy the book and he'd come up, he'd get an autograph from me and he'd say, Brad, wow, you just motivate me. I love it. Thank you. But he'd come the next year and he'd be fatter. And it would happen every single year. And I was like, he was such a nice guy. I was like, what's going on? Like, why am I not getting through to this guy? Maybe he's not reading a book. I don't know. So anyway, one year, it was about 6 years, from the day that I met this guy, I see this guy, but I don't recognize him because he had lost so much weight. He looked incredible. He had to come up to me at the end of the lecture. I didn't even leave the podium. He came up to me and he said, Brad, wow, I finally did it. And then it clicked. I was like, oh yeah, I know who you are. And I said, what happened? What made you, finally get off the horse? And he told me this story about his child. He said, I have a kid, and he's only, 2 years old, and I bring him to the park all the time to play. And what happened this one time, I get together with the other parents, and we're talking, and the kids are playing, and he said, all of a sudden I heard this scream, and I look up, and my kid's gone. And he goes, and I look, and my kid's on the street, and I'm like, he said everything happened so fast. So I got up and I went to save my kid, right? Because there was this truck coming and there was a lady in the second story of a house, and she was the one who screamed. And he said, I started running, instinct just took over. And I couldn't get to my kid. I cramped up, I fell down, I had no oxygen, I couldn't breathe anymore. And this guy scooped my kid up before I could and ran across the street and saved my kid's life. He said, I was ashamed. At that moment, he said, I will do anything to change my life. And he said, that's when I took all of the advice you gave me and I actually put it into action. So the moral of that story is so oftentimes it happens that we live our lives in these chains. We don't realize that we never even know that we have the key. Okay? Be your greatest asset. Make a change in your life. Don't wait a second longer. I tell people that are really close to me, and I have a lot of people that don't exercise, don't do things, and I don't want them to experience, a life of mediocrity. But no matter what I say, it doesn't matter. So I live by example, or at least I try to. It doesn't rub off on a lot of people. But people I care about, my one wish is that they get off their asses and make a life worth living actually happen. Stop existing. Thank you.